Our next speaker is Dr. Randall Brand. Dr. Brand is a gastroenterologist and professor of medicine at the University of Pittsburgh. He's the academic director of the GI division at UPMC Shadyside Hospital, director of the GI Malignancy Early Detection, Diagnosis, and Prevention Program. His clinical interests include early detection of pancreatic cancer, evaluating and caring for family members from pancreatic cancer-prone families, hereditary GI cancers, and evaluation of pancreatic cystic lesions. Dr. Brand is going to talk to us about a really important topic: should I participate in a clinical trial? Dr. Brand.
Well, I appreciate the invite again. I think this may be the fourth time through my career that I've had the opportunity to come out to UCLA and participate in the Hirschberg Educational Symposium. It's really, I'm quite blessed. I want to let you know, just as an editorial comment before I start this talk, that the Hirschberg Foundation, although you're so used to seeing it at UCLA and in Southern California, it really does impact nationally and even internationally investigators. At the University of Pittsburgh, we've been honored to have two of our, one was a postdoc, another faculty member, get a seed grant. And I could tell you the seed grant from Jamie Solomon, that when she received it in 2016, that helped her get onto our faculty because it was extramural funding. And now she's leveraged that experience into getting her first fundable R01 score, so we're pretty confident she'll get it. So we couldn't have done it without the seed money from the foundation. So we're very grateful for the Hirschberg Foundation, so thank you. On a separate note, this was probably my most enjoyable time putting together a talk, because it's so rare that I get to come up here and just talk about things that may not be as strong in science, but some of it more opinion on why we need to do the science. And so this is a new topic for me, and so I just want to emphasize that a lot of this is just my opinion. So I should do some disclosures. I do work with a couple companies that are on biomarkers, but that this work will not be discussed. I also want to disclose, as you learn, that I'm not an oncologist, but rather I'm a gastroenterologist who works doing clinical translational research for about 30 years. And lastly, I want to disclose I truly hate pancreatic cancer. I think, and so that's why I've worked 30 years, and I'm not going to retire till we beat it. So overview, I just want to, again, and it's going to be mixed and not necessarily trying to hit these topics about some background about what clinical trials are, and then reasons to participate, and then how can I find a clinical trial. And really, in some ways, this topic is why do we do clinical trials, just as much as why do you participate in them. And I'm going to do it a little bit beyond what most people usually focus on treatment, but being a gastroenterologist, I got to cover the whole gambit. So why are clinical trials needed in cancer in general? And we need to change the status quo. You know, survival rates for all cancers are not optimal. And by optimal, I mean it should be almost 100%. You know, that's what I think is an appropriate thing. Let's make it either a chronic disease like HIV that you could live with, or cured. But we know we're not there, so not only for pancreas cancer, but all cancers. And so I think we just have, that's right off the top. We know what we're doing now isn't good enough. And so certainly you can always dig this small hole with a spoon and be satisfied with the status quo, or you can take a shovel, something new, and get a bigger hole and maybe better meet this task. So just thinking simplistically, how do you improve cancer survival rates? Well, you can take a preventive approach, and we actually heard some good dietary recommendations today that will impact and lower your risk of getting pancreas cancer and other malignancies as well. It could be through early detection, and we had an excellent talk today on pancreatic cysts, and that's a good subset of patients that are at risk, or better treatment strategies and approaches. So keep in mind, all my colleagues in here that do research, pancreatic cancer researchers are optimists. So a pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity, while an optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. So that's really what's driving us to do our trials. So the National Cancer Institute, the NCI's definition of a clinical trial is a type of research study that tests how well new medical approaches work in people. These studies test new methods of screening, prevention, diagnosis, or treatment of a disease. Now, the basic background on any clinical trial is that there's typically a principal investigator, the person who takes primary responsibility, and co-investigators. And then there's a bunch of personnel that are involved, study coordinators, personnel, people that may be processing specimens or lab work or entering data. Now, these study protocols all go through an independent review board. So what we call the institutional review board. So they're all approved. So nobody can do anything that we don't feel is safe for the patient, and the benefits clearly outweigh the risks. Now, they usually have a defined study goal. They have eligibility criteria when you come across clinical trials. So in some instances, you may be eligible for a study for one type, but even though you have the same disease, you may not fit the criteria for a different trial. And they usually describe in detail what you have to go through with the process. Now, a lot of the times, some of these trials, they may be treatment related, it may be with giving you an agent, it may be trying a new device. It may be that you're going to agree to allow some blood to be drawn in you to help us come up with a new test, a biomarker test to help manage whether response to therapy or even diagnosing pancreatic cancer, or even giving permission to use leftover tissue that's not needed clinically for research purposes. Those are all important clinical studies. Now, the NCI actually has a pancreas task force. I just finished serving 6 years on it, where they get a group of experts together, and for these bigger collaborative groups, they actually review all these protocols. So they really do take it seriously when you see a good phase 3 protocol through a collaborative group. It's gone through rigorous review to be certain that it does make sense. So I'm going to give you, I won't call them pearls because I don't think, but more personal observations. So again, this is my own opinion. I'm sure there will be people that could certainly debate my opinions, but they may be right. But the first one is that we're dealing with vulnerable individuals when you talk about pancreatic cancer. This comes down to family members, or who are dealing with it if they come to see me for early detection because they've gone through sometimes some very difficult situations with a loved one having pancreatic cancer, or if you have pancreatic cancer yourself. We know how difficult that is and how people would be willing to do anything to get themselves better. And it's a stressful time when you hear about the possibility of something going on in your pancreas. And I'm amazed. My coordinators approach patients all the time because we need to get our blood in a good clinical applicable situation where they're being worked up for pancreatic cancer. And I'm humbled by the fact, and it really gives me faith when we hear so many negative things in this world, that over 90% of people just enroll in our studies and allow us to use blood or leftover cyst fluid, or and just because they want to help people and help the field. So there really is, even though you don't always hear it in the news because that's not what's popular, most people really do care about society and helping beat a bad disease. The other thing I've learned, though, is that every person deals with their situation in their own way. So sometimes people aren't just ready to accept it, and they'll just say, I'm not interested. That's fine. It's okay not to feel like you have to do something. Everyone's an individual, and we get it. And at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with not participating in a study. Now, personally, I like it at least people give themselves the opportunity to hear about an opportunity. But again, that's an individual choice. But I could tell you, and I've worked at 3 different academic centers through my career, none of your healthcare providers are going to hold it against you if you don't participate in a study. That should never be the reason why you participate in the studies, because I'm afraid my doctor's going to be mad at me. They all want, and that's why they educate you and we get informed consent for you to do it. You're still going to get just as good a care whether you participate in a study or not. But on the other hand, many individuals do appreciate the opportunity to participate in a trial. They recognize the importance of knowledge gain may help others, even if it doesn't help themselves. So again, back to that, really what I think most people have is the willingness to help others. You're not a guinea pig. That's the first thing that often gets said to me. Remember, I'm a GI doctor, so I'm often there right when we make the diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. And so I at times will say you need to go to a center where you're certain that they're studying the disease and offer you clinical trials, and they say, I don't want to be a guinea pig. You're not a guinea pig. The types of pancreatic cancer clinical trials, just crudely are that I'm going to talk about today are pancreatic cancer registries, early detection diagnosis studies, and some treatment studies. So when we look at early detection, early diagnosis, you have to realize the U.S. Preventive Service Task Force does not recommend screening for pancreatic cancer, and this was sort of discussed earlier, in asymptomatic adults not known to be at risk for pancreatic cancer. So when they reviewed the data, it was do not screen. But this was with the caveat that was alluded to today in the discussion. Does not apply to certain inherited genetic syndromes that are an increased risk for developing pancreatic cancer or history of familial pancreatic cancer at high risk. And that's really these two conditions, known associated genetic syndromes, 2 or more first-degree relatives. We heard about another group, patients with cystic lesions. We heard about all the different studies that were being done today and the superb talk earlier. These are other at-risk groups that you may hear about that we're trying to define and work on. Dr. Pandal over there is very active with the new onset diabetes cohort. Through our chronic pancreatitis diabetes pancreatic cancer program. Chronic pancreatitis patients, a subset, we're trying to work hard at identifying those that are at risk for getting pancreatic cancer and what's unique. And all this can't be done unless we get patients with new onset diabetes or pancreatic cancer involved in these trials. So when you just look at now for early detection of pancreatic cancer, and of course I use this as an example because I do a lot of research in it, there are a lot of, just like pancreatic cysts, surveillance guidelines that come out. And there's guideline after guideline really based on limited data. And most of us, tend to follow the recommendations in the CAPS guidelines. But the first statement in each one of these guidelines that have come out is they all emphasize the importance of participation in a registry or referral to a pancreatic cancer center of excellence. So this is where you get the opportunity to enroll in a clinical trial. And I'm going to show you the importance of why, because we cannot beat pancreatic cancer. And I think this is one of those diseases, pancreatic diseases in general, where the investigators and the institutions got it early, that we need to work together to beat this disease. And that's why there's so many consortiums out there right now that are funded by the NIH or through foundations that really are team efforts. And I'm going to show you some data to really get that point across. And we can only share the data if our patients agree to have their data shared in a de-identified manner. So yet another important reason why you should participate in a clinical trial. So these are 2 consortiums that are focused on hereditary GI pancreatic cancer families or those with the hereditary syndrome, at-risk, high-risk individuals. It's the PROCEED Consortium, main center out at NYU, and the CAPS Consortium out at Johns Hopkins. Our own institutional one at UPMC is what we call our PAGER study, and so we've enrolled over 7,000 patients for over 15 years with pancreatic cancer and controls. And so we couldn't do this without our patients or their willingness to do it. And I think the point is that we have blood samples on over 7,000 patients. And it seems like, well, that's a lot of blood samples. And our goal is that if someone has a biomarker now, they don't have to wait the 5 years for a test. We have them available because over 15 years, with a lot of them having clinical outcome now, that's reliable. So it's now become a resource for rapidly accelerating research. But that couldn't have been done if our patients 10 or 15 years ago didn't contribute to the whole process. So, and when we enroll them in our study, we get permission for blood, leftover tissue, cyst fluid, and then most importantly, their permission to share de-identified data and samples with other institutions. We do biomarker studies. We do germline genetic testing. A lot of this was developed with DNA that we took from our at-risk patient family members. We helped contribute to the identification of the ATM gene through Hopkins with Nick Roberts by our patients' willingness to donate their DNA. So we've done studies where now any patient with pancreatic cancer that's been accepted should get genetic testing regardless of what their family history is. We only, or personal history of cancer beyond the pancreas cancer. And that was done in part because our center and others were able to do studies on our patients who were diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and show that there was a 10% yield of clinically pathogenic variants identified that could be changed the care of themselves with treatment options, which is why it's very important to get it early on, or could impact on their families. You know, we also actively work, like UCLA and Cedars-Sinai on radiomics, and you know, we have permission to use the scans. And this is a team project, even amongst our institution, all of our different departments, surgery, oncology, GI, coordinators. You can see how much effort goes into it. And so it's no disrespect to smaller community hospitals, but for the majority of patients with pancreatic cancer, they really need to go to centers where they can offer them the opportunities. I mean, you had amazing resources that you heard here today at UCLA's group that, you know, we have a similar multidisciplinary clinic. So it's nice to give these options to someone that's going through pancreatic cancer. And those options include clinical trials. So that's just some summaries for the CAPS study on how to follow them. But the important point I want to make in this is that this is why we have to team together. Even though we're talking at-risk individuals, so these are people at the highest risk of getting pancreatic cancer, if you looked at a pooled study from 11 major sites, including us, Hopkins, major centers in Europe, we only diagnosed 32 cancers over like a 3 or 4 year period of time. So really limited data, a lot of institutions studying a lot of high-risk individuals. That's great for the high-risk individuals. We're not getting that much cancer. But if you put on your research hat, it's hard for us to make solid recommendations if any one center put together and only had 3 or 4 cases. So by pulling together, we're able to start getting cases where we can start showing some meaningful benefits like better survival rates, or just as importantly, this study from the US CAPS site, where even though we only had 13 pancreatic cancers or high-grade dysplasias identified over a 4 or 5 year period of time amongst 6 major centers, we were able, and that's with the surveillance of MRI or EUS on an annual basis. That pie chart there is really what I want to highlight is that over three quarters of the patients that were undergoing active surveillance we were able to show was found at stage 1 disease. That's contrasted to 10–15% at most when you present symptomatically just with your new diagnosis of pancreatic cancer when you're not undergoing surveillance. So we're starting to see by pulling together to get data, even though it's small numbers, that we are starting to shift to give more people the opportunity to be cured, because it's much better to obviously find the disease at an earlier stage. So our approach at UPMC to work up these patients does incorporate high-risk individuals, offering them research studies. Now, 9 out of 10 of my patients agree to that. The 10th one still gets treated with annual surveillance. So that's one thing you always have to keep in mind when you undergo a clinical trial, that you'll still get standard of care. So let's get on to the oncology. So there's phases of clinical treatment trials. So there's preclinical or laboratory studies that test on human or animal cells or models. Then it goes into phase 0, which is doing the drug in small doses to see whether it's tolerated. And then phase 1's when they start doing safety on it. Doesn't necessarily mean the drug will work for a particular cancer. Phase 2's when they determine whether the drug has suspected activity in cancer. And then phase 3 are the ones where you compare a new treatment to a standard treatment and see which one gives you a better outcome. And then phase 4 trials are post-FDA approval, where they try to follow up maybe toxicities, maybe better, more information about its efficacy, and that's post-approval. Now, there's different types of clinical treatment trials. There's first-line trials, which that's what it means, the first time you're getting treated for that cancer. Then there's second-line trials when you fail the first line, and then there's stage-dependent ones. If you're surgically resectable or borderline resectable, you may qualify for certain studies as opposed to someone who has metastatic disease. And then there's targeted treatments that may come up by studying the tumor and seeing if you have certain pathways that make your tumor vulnerable to certain treatment. Or sometimes you can even do that by doing circulating tumor cells. So the personal observation number 2, if possible then, reach out to centers that are experienced in caring for patients with pancreatic cancer, because they'll have more resources to care for you and help direct you. Turn to the advocacy groups, because that's one of their main missions, is helping you through this process, like the Hirschberg Foundation. I just went to their website when I was preparing this, and they have a very nice tool there for identifying clinical trials. And you can see that they have a lot of resources, some of them through UCLA, others nationally. So it's a great resource for anyone across the country to go, and it's been vetted. And then they have people in their office will help you and direct you as well. So this is everyone's concern, that you're not going to get, you're going to get placebo. And I just want to reassure you that that's not a concern. These are particularly in phase 3 trials when you're getting standard of care versus the study drug. You're always going to get standard of care. And we don't know if that study drug or intervention is going to be better or not. It made sense. We heard earlier about the trial for pancreatic cysts, where they combined alcohol with the paclitaxel. And actually the alcohol led to, which was the standard of care, led to more complications. So you thought you were getting more, but it was actually doing more harm. But it's very important for us to know whether there is a better outcome and if there are any concerning side effects. The other thing is, don't feel rushed to make a decision about your treatment when you learn about your diagnosis. I'm not advocating that you take a month or two, but I've heard so many cases where I've come across they have a mass in their pancreas and we're going to biopsy it to prove it, and they're already scheduled for their port placement and then to get their first chemotherapy a week later. And no discussions whatsoever about possibilities of participating in clinical trials, getting a second opinion so that you're sure that you're making the right decision. Because if you want a first-line therapy, you cannot start chemotherapy and say, you know what, I changed my mind, I want to go into that clinical trial. So if there's one thing I want to press to people making these decisions is just step back. Everyone's first instinct is, I got to start treatment right away. I'm not, again, saying wait 2 months. What I'm saying is wait, at least get yourself the chance to think about it. Be sure that you've talked to several centers that have a lot of experience in it, because you could really lose the opportunity, if that's something you wanted, to participate in a trial. And then when you come there, this is, maybe my oncology colleagues don't want me to say this, I would hope that they're enthusiastic about their trial. They decided to run that trial, and that's a good thing, because that means they vetted it and they thought that they have confidence that this is going to work. So you may sometimes be put in a dilemma if it doesn't sound right to you, but they're so enthusiastic about it. Well, if it doesn't sound right to you, then you may either find another clinical trial or you can stick with standard of care. But hopefully the investigators will be enthusiastic. And I also want to say, don't forget that a lot of this is, keep in mind quality of life issues. Everyone's instinct is, I'll go anywhere, do anything to get cured for my cancer. But there's something to be said about being near your supportive environment with family and friends, and there's financial ramifications sometimes for your decisions as well. So if you can stay locally and have great options, with usually one clinical trial is not better than another. So I'm calling it novel treatments outside of a clinical trial. This is when you may hear about, go to Mexico and get this treatment, or go do this, what I would call unconventional approaches. And I may be harsh on it, and they'll sit there and say it's because I'm in the medical community, and that's why I feel about it. But if results appear too good to be true, they're probably not true. And they may not be treating the types of cancers that you're talking about. And I could tell you that if there was something that was that successful, it would be available, because either a pharmaceutical company will have already jumped all over it, or because no healthcare provider is going to hold back a treatment that can impact on so many people. So always be wary of that. Again, that goes back to being vulnerable. And success in one cancer type, so you'll have a lot of meaningful friends say, I saw this doctor and he cured me of this. Doesn't necessarily translate to success for that it'll work in pancreatic cancer. But we are getting smarter so that targeted therapies can go across different cancers. And again, these are all parts of clinical trials. And don't think of it, I mean, yes, it's great. In the back of our mind, we go on these clinical trials because we hope we get that one magic bullet that's going to work, that we win the lottery. But I think just by participating in the clinical trial, you're providing the gift of knowledge to future generations and potentially yourself, and maybe you will get lucky. I mean, I pray every time for my patients that happens, but you're a winner just by participating. So really, at the end of the day, it doesn't come down to thinking about it like a lottery ticket, because with a lottery ticket, all I know is when I bought my Powerball tickets, I collected zero, and I got nothing back for it, not $1 billion. So I'd like to end with a quote from Bernard Shaw: both optimists and pessimists contribute to society. The optimist invents the airplane, the pessimist the parachute. So I'd rather be inventing the airplane. So thank you for your attention.
Thanks. That was very informative. My question is, if you participate in, let's say, a phase 1, does that preclude you from later participating in a later phase?
That's usually what you're alluding to. In most instances, that is true. Phase 1 trials tend to be sort of the last trials that we go to when you're trying a drug, because they haven't necessarily had proven activity for the cancer that's being tested. Often they may be for several different cancer types. So most doctors won't put their patients into a phase 1 trial until they've tried trials that are more promising, because obviously we want to give the best options to the patients. And so you want ones that at least have a hint of activity in the cancer. And that's why, again, they've gone through review by people that are unbiased to say that data seems legit.
All right, let me follow up, because maybe I didn't pose it correctly. Let's say, if I remember from your slide, you have phase 1, phase 2, various levels of participation, and it moves the earliest one after phase 0, let's say phase 1, and you're one of that small group, and let's say it's determined that it's effective.
Okay,
I'm
okay.
not sure if I'm
So,
articulating
no,
it
no,
right.
right. So, no, the purpose of a phase 1 trial is to find the the dose that a patient
Right.
can tolerate.
Right.
So they're giving that to you looking at toxicity.
Okay.
And also measuring as secondary outcomes the responses for the different cancer types.
Okay.
So a phase 2, you're actually looking to see how many people with a given cancer respond to that, whatever dose was calculated out for phase 1 and what the toxicities are, and if there's a legitimate dose. Phase 3s, you're comparing that drug maybe in combination with several other agents compared to the several other agents alone, just for simplistic ways of comparing it. So as you go, the earliest one, phase 1, because it doesn't necessarily have proven activity, there may be in animal models why they picked pancreatic cancer to be in, so I'm not saying there's none, but it hasn't had a proven effect actually in clinical practice for subjects. That's why it's the earliest phase and tends to be used later.
Okay, so I'll try. So if I'm in a phase 1 trial and then later they open it up, a couple of phases later, because I was in phase 1, does that mean I may not be able to participate in one of those?
It'll come down to what the eligibility criteria are for a given trial. Many trials do allow you to be in a different type of trial. So the phase number is in itself, it's the actual eligibility trial criteria for a given trial.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so thank you.